All right, diving right in today.
Yeah.
We're looking at Prime Minister Holness's recent budget speech.
This is a big one.
It is.
It's the budget speech for 2025-2026.
For the House of Representatives.
Delivered on March 20th, 2025.
Yes, and we've got the transcript, the official one.
Absolutely. Publicly available.
So if you want to follow along at home,
Yeah.
you can find it. And we really want to break this down for you.
Give you the highlights.
What are the big announcements?
What are the key priorities?
What's the government's plan?
For Jamaica in this coming year,
Yeah, this new fiscal year.
starting April 1st.
And just to give you a sense of the scale here,
Yeah.
it's a 1.26 trillion Jamaican dollar budget.
Wow.
So it's a lot of money we're talking about.
A lot.
And Prime Minister Holness really framed his speech around these ideas of building Jamaica,
We choose Jamaica.
really focusing on making sure that,
The economy works for people.
accelerating growth,
Yeah.
aiming for
Peace, productivity, prosperity.
for all Jamaicans.
all Jamaica.
And it was widely anticipated, this speech, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because he was going to
Gonna
be
prove justice.
listening to,
Comments from the opposition.
yeah, during the budget debate.
Exactly.
So let's get into it.
Let's go.
Let's start with the economy.
Okay, so Prime Minister Holness spent quite a bit of time really reviewing
How are we doing?
how's the Jamaican economy been doing.
Under his administration.
Yeah.
Let's start with inflation, because that's,
The thing that everybody feels
everybody feels it
in their pocket.
every day.
Yeah.
So he stated that the average annual inflation rate
Okay.
during his time in office has been 5.5%.
5.5.
Now, what's really interesting
Yeah.
is he claims that this is the lowest it's been since 1972,
Wow.
and that it's within their target range of 4-6%.
Even with all the global stuff that's happening.
Even with everything.
The global pressures.
Yeah, he even said,
If you take out COVID,
right?
if you take out those unusual spikes right after COVID,
Right.
they would have been even lower, like around 4.3%.
Interesting. So,
A lot of that was due to global factors.
right. But it does make you think, right?
Of course, yeah.
When will those lower rates
Will they continue?
be sustainable?
And they be sustained?
And what will that really mean for
For people.
cost of living?
Your pocket.
Yeah, and then he drew a contrast, right?
Yeah.
The People's National Party.
The PNP.
When they were in power,
From 89 to 2007
89 to 2007, he said the average annual inflation then
was much, much higher.
was 18.5%
Every year.
every single year.
Wow.
And to really kind of hit this home,
Drive it home.
he talked about a loaf of bread, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That would cost less than $1 in 1989.
Okay.
Would have cost you $130 in 2007.
That's wild.
That's a huge, huge difference.
That is huge.
Oh, 2,249% cumulative inflation.
He mentioned that. Yeah, he said that's significant.
And I think the listener might be thinking, hold on a second.
Yeah.
We've heard this before.
About the PNP.
Yeah, this is kind of a pattern.
It is a pattern.
And this is where I think, he's trying to,
Draw that contrast.
really make a distinction between how they're managing the economy.
And how it was managed in the past.
And he also brought a FinSAC,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which for those who don't know,
That's the financial sector adjustment company.
right. And it was this big government intervention
Huge intervention in the financial sector.
in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, to deal with a financial crisis.
A big financial crisis.
And it led to a lot of debt,
Yeah, it's often associated with
A big increase in national debt.
So he's kind of, drawing that line
Trended dot.
between that period and the current economic management.
And saying, we're doing things differently.
Yeah. All right. So then he brings it back to today.
Okay.
And he says, look, right now,
Yeah.
annual inflation is down to 4.4%,
Which is,
which is within the Bank of Jamaica's target range.
okay, so they're meeting their targets.
They are. And he stressed their commitment.
To keeping inflation under control.
Yeah, through that independent central bank
Okay.
and what he called responsible fiscal policies.
Responsible fiscal policies.
So you can see there's a real,
Theme emerging here.
a strategy, a deliberate shift from what he's implying.
Were the less effective policies of the past?
Yeah, let's move on to jobs.
Okay,
The
John.
big one
Huge.
for any economy.
For sure.
He was quite optimistic about this, wasn't he?
Yeah, very optimistic.
He said the unemployment rate is at a historic low,
He did.
3.5%.
3.5%.
And just to give you context,
Yeah.
he said that when the PNP left office in 2016,
Right.
it was 13.7%.
So a big drop.
Huge drop.
Wow.
And he didn't just stop there. He went on to youth unemployment.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is a really, really big issue in Jamaica.
Of course.
He said youth unemployment has fallen to 11%.
11%, okay.
From 32% in 2016.
Big difference.
Huge, huge difference.
A whole generation.
It is.
That's coming into the workforce now.
And he actually put a number on the jobs created.
Yeah.
253,000 since 2016.
Okay.
Which works out to an average of about 28,000 new jobs every year.
Per year? That's significant.
And then he compared that, of course.
Of course he did.
To the PMP's record.
Had to.
2011 to 2016, which he said was around 15,000 jobs per year.
Okay, so almost double.
Almost double, yeah.
So he's really emphasizing that job creation.
Yeah, but it does make you wonder.
Yeah.
What kind of jobs?
What kind of jobs are we talking about?
What's the quality of these jobs?
Right.
What are the wages like?
And is it just...
For those 253,000 people.
Has there been a shift?
Yeah. Has there been a shift in the types of jobs?
Yeah, the quality of the jobs.
So those are things to think about.
Definitely.
But he's definitely painting a picture.
A positive picture.
Of a very vibrant job market.
Under his leadership.
Yeah. And he did connect it.
He tried to, yeah.
To real people.
Real people.
Families, communities.
Saying this is not just about numbers.
These are real lives.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the exchange rate.
All right. Another key indicator.
A big one.
Of how an economy is doing.
So what did he say about the Jamaican dollar?
What did he say about the Jamaican dollar?
So he said that over the past 9 years, the Jamaican dollar has depreciated against the U.S. dollar.
Okay.
By an average of 2.99% each year.
Per year.
And he called this the lowest rate of depreciation.
To its independence.
Since Jamaica became an independent nation.
Wow.
And again, of course, he contrasted this
He had to.
with the last PMP administration.
Right.
And he said during that time, it was an average annual depreciation of 88.5%.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Huge difference.
Huge.
And just like with the inflation figures,
yeah,
he pointed back to that 1989-2007 period where the dollar depreciated by a massive 1,178%.
From 5.51 to 74.1 Jamaican dollars per U.S. dollar.
Yeah, that's a huge change.
That is a huge change.
And so he's really emphasizing the stability.
The stability, yeah.
Of the foreign exchange market.
Right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
Attributing it to sound policies, investor confidence.
A growing economy.
And he's framing this as a big win.
A win for businesses.
For consumers. Everybody. For everyone.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move beyond just the U.S. dollar.
Okay.
And talk about how Jamaica interacts financially with the rest of the world.
Balance of payments.
Yes.
Okay.
So he acknowledged that historically, Jamaica has had
what are called current account deficits.
Meaning more money is flowing out.
And coming in.
Right.
Which is not ideal.
Not ideal. And he said this has been the case for most of Jamaica's history.
Only 5 years.
With only 5 surplus years since independence.
Since independence, wow.
Yeah.
So this has been a long-standing issue.
But here's the interesting part.
Yeah.
He's saying things are changing.
Things are changing.
He said that Jamaica recorded surpluses of 1.9% of GDP in the fiscal year 2022-2023 and 3.1% in 2023-2024.
So back-to-back surpluses?
Back-to-back surpluses. And he even said they've had a surplus in 7 of the last 8 quarters.
So it's a trend.
It is a trend.
It's not just a one-off thing.
Right. And this is really
a significant turnaround.
Yeah. It means that more money is coming into Jamaica.
Through exports, investments?
Than is leaving through imports and other outflows.
Right. So it's a
much healthier position.
Eternal financial position.
Yes.
For Jamaica.
So building on that positive picture.
Yes.
He then talked about the net international reserves, NIR.
Okay, NIR.
And he said that Jamaica has a record high $5.5 billion.
In NIR.
In NIR.
Which basically acts as a
national savings account.
Yeah, rainy day fund.
To cover
unexpected economic storms.
Essential imports.
Yeah.
And he said this represents about 29 weeks.
Of import cover.
That's
pretty good.
It is. It is.
That's a good cushion.
And he was very proud to point out.
Yeah.
That this is a 131% increase.
Since 2016.
Since 2016.
Despite all the global
stuff.
Crises.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
So again, creating this picture of
stability
in the face of all this global volatility.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're putting Jamaica in a position where they can weather some of those storms.
And finally, on the economic front, he addressed the big one, the elephant in the room.
The debt.
The debt to GDP ratio.
Yeah.
This has been a long-standing challenge.
Huge challenge.
For Jamaica.
Yeah.
So he said that this ratio, which basically compares
the country's total debt
to the size of its economy.
The value of its economy.
Has fallen from over 120%
Wow.
to approximately 68.7%.
That's a significant drop.
It is. It is.
So they're making progress.
They are.
On that.
And he even projected
Today.
that they're on track to reach 60% by March 2028.
60%. Okay, that's their target.
That's the target.
They're aiming for
And then he kind of went into
history.
the history, like, how did we get here?
Yeah. Why is Jamaica in so much debt?
And he pointed to a lot of things.
Oil price shocks.
Democratic socialism era.
Back in the 70s and 80s.
Hurricanes Allen and Gilbert.
Big, devastating hurricanes.
But he really, really emphasized the PNP's FinSac era.
Right, in the 90s and 2000s.
Which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And he's saying this was a major, major contributing factor.
To those high debt levels.
And he explained how those high debt servicing costs,
which at one point
reached 71% of the government's tax revenue.
Wow. So most of their money was just going to paying off old debts.
Yeah. They had no room to maneuver.
No, not really.
They couldn't invest in things like
infrastructure,
hospitals. Yeah. The things that people need.
And then he brings it back to the present.
Okay.
And says, look, in this current budget,
yeah,
only 18.7% of tax revenues are going towards interest payments.
Wow. That's a huge difference. Huge difference.
That's a lot of fiscal space.
That's what he called it. Fiscal space.
Yeah, room to maneuver.
Room to breathe.
To spend money on things.
On the things that matter.
Schools, hospitals.
So this is a really key takeaway for our listeners.
Absolutely.
Fiscal space means the government has more room in their budget.
To spend money on the things that matter.
Because less money is going towards paying off all debts.
Right.
And he really underscored
the
need to maintain fiscal discipline.
Don't go spending recklessly.
Right. Even if it might be popular.
Right. Short-term gain.
In the short term.
Long-term pain.
Yeah. And he presented this as,
a fundamental principle
of responsible governance.
Yeah.
That will benefit Jamaica in the long run.
In the long run.
Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Talk about taxes.
Taxation.
And any measures for fiscal relief.
Yeah, because that's what people want to hear.
That's what people want to know.
Is their money going to be affected?
Exactly. So this is another area where he really emphasized consistency.
Okay.
He said that this is the 8th consecutive budget.
Wow.
With no new taxes.
No new taxes.
And the 10th with no net new taxes.
Okay, so no net new taxes.
So that means that they may have made some changes.
Some adjustments here and there.
But overall,
tax burden hasn't increased.
Hasn't increased.
In 10 budgets.
In 10 budgets.
That's pretty significant.
And he went even further. He said his administration has overseen more reductions in taxes
than any other
period since independence.
Since independence, that's a big claim.
It is a big claim.
Okay, let's hear the details.
So let's get into the specifics.
Okay.
He talked about the income tax threshold.
Okay, income tax.
Which was $592,500 when they took office.
Okay.
And is now $1.7 million.
Yeah, it's a big jump.
Huge jump.
Wow.
And he said that they're going to increase it even more.
Even more.
To $1.8 million next month.
Okay.
And then to $2 million in the following 2 budgets.
So they're gradually increasing it.
Gradually increasing it, so that means that...
More money.
More money in people's pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he mentioned the GCT, the General Consumption Tax.
Right, GCT.
Which has been reduced from 16.5% down to 15%.
Okay, a little bit of relief there.
A little bit of relief, and specifically for households.
Yeah.
He talked about residential electricity.
Okay.
That GCT has been reduced from 15% to 7%.
So that's going to affect people's utility bills.
Directly.
Directly, yeah.
And then for property transaction.
Property.
He talked about the transfer tax.
Transfer tax.
Being reduced from 5% to 2%.
Okay.
And they've replaced that ad valorem stamp duty.
Which was a percentage.
Yeah, of the property value.
With a flat rate.
With a flat rate of $5,000 per document.
Okay.
So these are all measures that could potentially make things more affordable.
More affordable.
For people.
Yeah.
For pensioners, he talked about pension relief and age relief.
Okay. Yep.
Which have been raised from $80,000 to $250,000.
Okay.
And they're planning to increase that further to $350,000.
In the next budget.
In the next budget. So that's
giving pensioners more.
Tax advantages.
Yeah. Tax breaks.
And for small businesses.
Small businesses.
The turnover threshold for GCT registration.
Meaning you don't have to register.
Yeah.
If you're below this threshold.
It has been increased from $3 million to $10 million.
Okay.
And now they're increasing it further to $15 million.
So more small businesses
won't have to
deal with the hassle of collecting GCT.
And then for consumers who buy things online,
Yeah, imports.
from overseas,
Imports.
they increased that de minimis value,
De minimis.
which is the value below which
You don't have to pay duties.
you don't have to pay duties,
Usually.
from $50 to $100.
Okay.
And they also increased the duty-free allowance for travelers
Coming into Jamaica.
from $500 to $1,000.
Okay, so that's good for travelers. And people who shop online.
And he listed a whole bunch of other
Tax reductions.
reductions and
On
abolitions,
state taxes.
asset tax on financial institutions,
Gone.
asset tax on non-financial institutions,
Oh,
minimum business tax.
gone.
Gone.
He's on a roll.
Yeah, and he really, throughout all of this,
Yeah.
was contrasting
His government's record,
With-
when he's calling the PNP's pass,
of increasing
taxes,
So he's really positioning himself
as the
tax relief guy.
tax cutter.
All right, let's move on to something a little bit more complex.
Okay.
Securitization transactions.
Securitization. This is interesting.
This is interesting.
Yeah.
So he explained this as
Basically packaging future income streams.
from an asset
Yeah.
and selling it for
Selling.
lump sum of money today.
Okay, so you're getting money now
Money now.
in exchange for future income.
And he used the example of the Norman Manley International Airport,
Okay.
the concession agreement. Right.
So they basically got a lump sum of money
Yeah.
by selling the rights to operate the airport
For a certain period of time.
for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And he made a point of saying
Yeah.
that the previous PNP government
Tried to do that.
tried to do this, but they weren't successful.
They failed.
He said they didn't even get a single proposal.
That they thought was viable.
So again,
Drawing that cover.
showing how effective
Yeah.
his administration is.
Compared to the previous one.
And he said that they use this lump
The
sum
money they get.
to pay down the national debt
Okay.
and to fund new infrastructure,
Like the Highway 2000 extension.
a Highway 2000 extension.
Okay.
And he was very careful to say,
Yeah.
this is not the same as what the PNP did back in 2001.
Which was the forward sale of bauxite.
Bauxite, yeah.
Yeah.
So they basically sold bauxite
At a predetermined price.
before it was even mined.
Yeah.
And then when the market changed
Yep.
and the cost of production went up,
They lost money.
they lost money.
So he's saying securitization is a much more responsible, transparent way of managing.
Assets.
All right. Poverty reduction.
This is a big one.
Huge. For Jamaica.
For any country,
Absolutely.
but especially for a country
with the challenge of...
Jamaica faces.
Yeah.
So he stated that poverty rates have declined
Okay.
under his administration
Every year.
consistently and measurably,
Apart from...
with the exception of that pandemic-related spike.
Right.
And he emphasized that their focus is on empowerment,
Not just handouts.
sustainable solutions.
Yeah.
And he highlighted a number of initiatives.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, the social pension program,
Okay.
which gives $115,000 annually
To vulnerable citizens.
who are 75 and older.
Okay.
They've increased investment in the new social housing program,
Okay.
the tourism pension scheme.
Which was implemented in 2022.
Yes.
Okay.
And for entertainers and creatives.
The Jamaica Entertainers and Creatives Insurance Plan.
Launched in 2024.
Yes. And for families.
Yeah. PA.
The Program of Advancement through Health and Education.
Yes.
They've increased funding for that by 30%
30%.
in 2024.
Wow. Okay.
And he said they're working on unemployment insurance.
That's a big one.
That would be huge.
Yeah, that would be major.
Safety net.
For people.
Yeah. And then he announced
Yeah.
the Hope for Children Trust Fund,
Hope for children.
which is starting with $200 million.
Okay.
And the goal is to provide savings and assets
For children.
for children from low-income families
Okay.
and those in state care.
So trying to break
The cycle.
the cycle of poverty
And he even called for
Everywhere.
private sector contributions
to help grow this fund.
to help grow it.
So he's really trying to get everyone involved
Everybody.
in this.
In lifting people out of poverty.
And then he talked about socializing wealth,
Socializing wealth.
which is an interesting concept.
Yeah, what does that mean? So he described it as
Okay.
creating opportunities for ordinary Jamaicans
Ordinary Jamaicans.
to own shares
Okay.
in big national infrastructure assets
Like
through the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
through the stock market.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he pointed to Wigton Farms
Wigton Farms.
and the Trans-Jamaican Highway
Okay.
as examples
Of companies.
where they've divested shares.
To the public.
And he said that the recent offer for the remaining 20%
Of the Trans-Jamaican Highway.
was oversubscribed.
Oversubscribed, meaning
More people wanted it.
then there were shares available.
So he's saying
Jamaican
Jamaicans are eager
to own
to own these assets.
Yeah, to be part
of the growth.
The growth of the country.
And he also said that they're preparing the Jamaica Mortgage Bank to be listed on the stock market.
So another opportunity.
Another opportunity.
Yeah.
And he contrasted this with
what he called
the PNP's socializing debt.
During FinZac.
Yeah.
Where he claimed that
wealth was transferred
from the less affluent
to the more affluent.
Okay, so he's making a clear distinction.
The very clear distinction between his approach
and their approach
to wealth creation and distribution.
All right, let's talk about safety and security.
This is a big one.
A huge one.
For Jamaica.
For any country.
Yeah, but especially Jamaica.
Yeah, it's been a long-standing issue.
Absolutely.
So he said that we're seeing a turning point.
A turning point.
In the fight against violent crime.
Okay.
And he presented some statistics.
Okay.
Murders down 19% in 2024.
Okay.
Following a 7% decline in 2023.
So a downward trend.
A downward trend.
In murders.
The homicide rate.
Okay.
Down to 40.1 per 100,000 people.
From 50 in 2016.
So again.
Progress.
And he said that Jamaica is now safer
than it has been.
Than it's been in the last 20 years.
Okay.
And that they're on track to have fewer than 1,000 murders.
For the first time since 2003.
For the first time since 2003.
Wow.
And he also mentioned major crimes.
Major crimes overall.
Down 21%.
Wow, that's the lowest.
Lowest since 1999.
Since 1999.
So again, painting this picture of
improvement.